Just 1 second. I am trying to get this. Yeah, now can you see?
Yep.
Okay. Very good afternoon to all the scholars from South India in international relations, and thank you, Dr. Mail, for having me here. Yeah, education, especially higher education, is something of my interest in terms of research as well as passion in this domain. So, at this juncture where we are seeing the National Education Policy 2020 coming in, I think it's more than looking at the present and the future. It's also good to reflect on the past and to see how it has evolved and what all it has considered and what are the dimensions which is not being considered. So let me set the context for discussion here for all the scholars who are here. One of the points that we see is the three E's, that is expansion, equity, and excellence, have been the constant focus of our policy since independence. And also, not only the policy, but also practice. Not much on the excellence component, but also especially the first two, that is expansion and equity, have been the constant emphasis that we see, which have been part of the policy directions and also various committees' reports, right? But however, with the changing context or the ecosystem in which both the school as well as higher education is thriving, though I'm emphasizing more on higher education here, it is important to see what all changes ought to happen given the result of changing environment, both the internal, that is within the nation, as well as beyond the nation. And secondly, as a result of those changes in the environment or the ecosystem in which the higher education thrives, what are the changing governance structures at the institution level, especially? Also, at the same time, at the meta level, that is the regulatory system, as Professor Srinivasan also flagged the changes that have been mentioned or recommended in the NEP 2020, and how does these two compound further to the emergence of new types of higher education institution, which is again a major recommendation which comes through in the NEP 2020 as the policy advisory. Also, let me also flag this point that as we see, policies are often what you call the vision document or direction that it sets forth for various implementing agencies to appropriate them, adapt to them, and then implement them. I think that's where we need to now debate and discuss also. That's my second contextual point that I would like to highlight. So to go to in retrospect, or to provide a conceptual frame, any policy or any domain or any sector will have certain objectives, certain level at which they focus on, and certain entity dimensions who engage in those focus areas, and certain outcome dimensions which are ought to evolve. So to give an example here, for higher education, and this is a paper which we have published in 2016, and at the time when the TSR Subramaniam committee was being prepared or was being framed. So in that we found out to take a stock of the past and to analyze what needs to come out in prospect. We looked at certain dimensions. Higher education is the component of the sector. Under that dimensions, we have the policy dimension, we have the objectives of the policy, we have the level at which it ought to focus on, it need to focus on, and then what are the educational aspects, sciences, profession, vocation, etc., and the entity who need to deliver these things and at what level they should deliver, and what is expected of this out of this entity from the policy in terms of development, whether it is scientific development, technical development, economic development, social, cultural. So in essence, what we see, if anybody is from a math background here, you can simply see that there are these complexities which are encapsulated into 1,47,840 combination. To read one combination for you to get an idea, I would read funding policy for geographical accessibility in master's education in the sciences by National Institutes for Scientific Development. So like that, we have this combination with 8 elements here, 11 elements here, etc. Having said that, what does this framework helps us to envisage here? One, it provides a big picture of the major policy elements and dimensions and components which needs to be reflected, which needs to be engaged. Second, it also provides us the complexity of the phenomenon to which the education policy had to respond to, especially with the vacuum or policy vacuum that we had in the last 30 odd years. And given that context, what are the changes it ought to bring in? Now, based on this framework, and this is available in the paper. I'll be happy to share the paper eventually, so that we'll focus more on the content of the present today's discussion. But this paper also looks into the policy, erstwhile policies, because often we keep hearing that there were two major policies, national policies, and one program of action, which again Professor Srinivasan physically displayed the program of action document. So how, if you take that into account on one hand, and also these policies of 1968, 1986, and the program of action 1982 have not just evolved just like that. There have been so many committees which were formed to look into specific aspects of school education, higher education, or combination of both. So looking at those, we see that there are important reports and policy documents would be around 28 of them. So what we did was a simple content analysis of that was done, which I'll show the next slide, which was divided into pre-liberalization era and the post-liberalization era, to see what were the policy documents that were there. For example, in the pre-liberalization era, we have the 1968 policy and the 1986 policy, up to the modified version to some extent, but the committees within that. So if you see here, from independence, that is from 1947, 48 onwards to 1989, that is the pre-liberalization era, we see that there are almost around 13, that is two national policies, that is 68 and 86, and another 11 committee reports, which were critical for higher education. I'm only talking about higher education. We do a simple content analysis of that. And what we see here? We see that there are the one which have the longer bar here, the one which is where I'm pointing my pointer here, is where we call it as the bright spot. There's a lot of focus on that in the policy discussion or discourse. Where there is no mark or no emphasis here, it is called the blind spot, right? Where there is a small point here, it is basically the something which has been flagged but not taken into account very seriously. So what we see a picture here, to give some hints, I think if you see the paper, you'll get an idea, but let me also put a couple of pointers here, right? See the policies and the reports, the committee reports that we saw from the independence to the just before the pre-liberalization. There's a lot of emphasis, the policy emphasized on personnel and governance. For example, here we had the Gajendra Gadkar committee report. It focused on university governance. In essence, what we see is there has been emphasis on reforms continuously as and when the higher education was evolving since independence. The NEP also talks about it. 2020 also refers to it, engages with it. At the same time, it also focuses on regulation. But what are the divergences and convergences is something which we need to discuss. So then what we see is the pre-liberalization era does not engage much on the private or deemed university focus, because it only emerges beyond the liberalization era. And coming to this component, the outcome component, it was expected from the policy discourse and the committee reports, the emphasis must be on social development, that is, higher education must contribute to social development, followed by scientific development, then cultural development, technical and economic development. What we are seeing in the NEP 2020 is focus on more on the economic dimension of it, indirectly or directly, followed by scientific development that is expected out of higher education institutions. Now, whether these gaps are very clearly visible in today's policy or something that we see that the past policies have failed. You are the beneficiaries of the system since the time that we have seen in various ways, in various forms. You see that have we achieved social development in terms of its overall higher education expectation, or is it that we still continue to focus on that? This is the pre-liberalization picture, right? Now, the post-liberalization, that is the post-92 present, that is the present here is defined as 2016, because that's where the T.S.R. Subramaniam Committee submitted its draft. But I will come to the NEP, that's why I have only limited to 2016. So here what we see, again, unlike the pre-liberalization period, in the post-liberalization, this was a blind spot in the previous one. I'll go back here, blind spot. And this we see there are two, the numbers in the bracket represent the number of documents, that is a policy or a committee report focusing on that. So in the previous pre-liberalization, we had 13 documents, and in the post-liberalization, we have 15 documents. So in that 15 documents or reports, we have two focusing on temporality, which is again very much aligned to the new public management discourse emerging as a part of post-liberalization era, wherein there was accountability in terms of the institutions and the state to implement. Dr. Mail, I'm getting some background noise. If you could mute the participants. Dr. Mail, hello?
I'll check it out. Yeah, I'll check it out.
Yeah, thank you. Then the second point that we see in post-liberalization is coming in of the private and autonomous colleges that we are seeing. A lot of emphasis has been given in EP. So what again we see a shift, right? There is continuation of focus on social development, but what we see is the reduction or slowly backtracking with cultural development of higher education and technical. If I see there's a name called, yeah, now it's better. Thank you. The noise has reduced. Thank you. So in the post-liberalization era, we see that there are some changes which ought to happen, especially in this entity component. We see reports and policies which are emphasizing on the coming in of the private sector, as well as the temporality component. So there are many differences that we see in the policy dialogue. So what does it convey? Is there has been some sort of an attempt to understand what was the state of the affairs or the evidence of that period of time, and equally appropriate. At the same time, the emphasis on development has been very, very skewed. Maybe in the post-liberation era, the focus was more, ought to be on the technical and scientific development because the need of the hour was that, but we don't see that has been the focus of those policies or reports then, right? But there is a lot of continuation of focus on social and economic, which is also very important. But this absence here is very critical. So similarly, what we see in the National Education Policy 2020, there has been a lot of discussion and discourse that has emerged in terms of what was there in the past and what has to be considered for the present. And do they still continue to focus on issues of accessibility, equity, affordability, accountability, and quality. In the present, the focus on quality has been little more emphasized in the present policy, but these two, accessibility and equity, continue to be the problem. They have been considered a perennial problem, especially in terms of higher education in the country. But affordability, accountability has been also flagged in the document, at least in the draft. There have been some changes, which I'll come to. In what way they are changes is something that is matter of concern that we need to discuss. Now, the policy making phenomenon that we see in the present form of NEP 2020 claims that these have been the steps or procedures to arrive at the draft, right? That's what, as I said, looking into the past, what were the policy reports and documents and how they have reflected, what are the gaps, what have been the overemphasis or no emphasis, etc., or the bright blind and the blank spots, then consultations that were claimed, etc. But from the committee to the final version, which is the last week's version, there was another process where the draft was in the public domain for more than 2 months, and that was something that was considered to be very critical for public debate and discussion. So that is where the formal version happened. So during that process, there were certain things which were accepted from the draft, and there were a few things which were dropped from the draft to the final stage. To go to the next one quickly, the policy considers in higher education 8 challenges, but I'll not discuss all of them because of time limitation. But let me flag one or two. The fragmentation of higher education system. The policy claims that there have been more than 20% of colleges out of 40,000 plus colleges who have enrollment of less than 100, and there are almost 4 to 11% of colleges who have enrollment of more than 3,000. So there's a lot of skewness as well as fragmentation which is out there, and they claim that one has to consolidate and restructure this particular institutional frame in order to enhance and have better resource allocation. That's the claim that has been made, or the point that has been said so. And also the idea of rigid boundaries, that is de-siloing across disciplines, which has been claimed in the, or which has been recommended in the policy to harness multidisciplinarity and so on and so forth. So in essence, the policy says not only quality, but also accessibility and equity are equally important in terms of enhancing GR. But the question is, increasing GR will not necessarily lead to a better equity representation or accessibility. But the objective is that by 2035, 50% of GR is what they aim at. Now, to take few examples, the present form of the policy claims or recommends, apart from the major points that are there, using technology as a means to enhance GR. Now, this opens up the Pandora's box of digital divide, accessibility, and all those things. But there have been recommendations which are backed by statements in terms of no child left behind, etc. So that is where again the challenge of implementation comes in. That is where the issue of state and institutions, how they will adapt to that, will come in. But this is very interesting, the restructuring of higher education institutions. Not many might know about the fact that what was the rationale behind it. Earlier, the existing institutions type were largely based on their ownership. If it is a public state university, the state is the one which allocates resources and owns it. Central university means the central government, allocates resources and owns it, kind of thing, in terms of resource support. But they want to now revise it to by function, because anywhere in the world, if you go to any institution, higher education institution, they focus on three core functions: research, teaching, and service or extension. So now they're trying to go to the function as a criteria or a parameter to segregate them and consolidate them rather than the ownership. So there are three types. Type 1, that is research institutions which focus on research but with some teaching. Then type 2, teaching institutions with some research. Typically, our public state universities are often falling under this category. And then type 3, how to consolidate the affiliating university colleges into degree awarding autonomous colleges going forward. And that's the biggest challenge that I can see in terms of the implementation framework. Now, another point which I'll highlight, which is much talked about in the present discourse on the NEP 2020, is the flexible multiple entry and exit option. Now, one of the rationale that I heard here, or I have been witness to that, is the notion of dropout, or the label of dropout should be gradually phased out. And that is where the progressive completion of the undergraduate program is envisaged here. If a student completes first year and due to certain reasons, by choice or by force, if they have to discontinue, they will get a certificate. So like that, if you're there at the institution for 4 years, you would get a honors degree or a research degree, which would enable you to go for higher education, is what has been claimed. But the problem is, this would make UG as a terminal degree. And what does that necessarily mean that a student would not be able to move progressively to higher education or higher studies is a big question mark. Now, as a scholars of international relations, I think this is something that we need to discuss also and hear your views, that policy envisages internationalization at home as a way forward rather than internationalization otherwise, that is, as it is followed now. Now, these are challenges that we see, because when we say internationalization at home, are institutions prepared to receive these students? Are they able to engage with those students and their concerns? And what are the regime that currently we have who can address such kind of issues? So that's the other point. Now, going to the next one, the focus on National Research Foundation. Yeah, the focus on National Research Foundation is one welcome thing to reflect upon, but subject to how it is implemented is the emphasis on social sciences, from a purely STEM-centric to a more social science-centric, and also the notion that public and private will be seen together and not as something as two distinctive. I'm almost coming to an end. I will rush fast. Now, what are the changes that we see? One changes from the draft to the present version is the promise in the draft that 20% of the overall public expenditure in education to the continuation of the erstwhile 6% GDP nomenclature that we see is a change from the draft, which was this, but in the approved version, we see the focus on 6% GDP. Then way forward to the future, I see that each state has to draw their implementation roadmap. I think that's the major challenge that one can see. And what all we can see in terms of perspective of the education policy 2020 is the claim that has been made. It's considered education as a continuum. It kind of claims that or recommends integrated and holistic learning. There's a lot of emphasis on institutional autonomy and institutional centricism, which could be very helpful and much needed. But how about losing trust in those institutions? And if they don't live up to their expectation, who's going to engage with them is a question. And it is very outcome based, not input based, and it recommends promotion of strong research culture. But are we ready to take on to that kind of a system right now? With this, I'll stop. I think I overshot some time. Sorry, Mel, for that, but thank you.